Hey, welcome to the Raptors weekly podcast, although this is a more short form version of it, something I'm calling, I guess, consensus, where I'm bringing on beat writers and league-wide writers, asking them a short set of questions to figure out what do these guys really, and girls, really think of what's going on with the Raptors? What is being communicated via the film and the media to these people? And we're going to get into that first with Jackson Frank, who is a league-wide writer covering the NBA for Basketball News, Dime Up Rocks, and Liberty Ballers. One of my favorite writers, to be quite frank with you. So if I come off as a bit biased towards his line of thinking, apologies. But yeah, he's done so much great work. His scope is exceptionally wide for the league. And so, Jackson, very pleased to have you on. How you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty well. I appreciate the kind words, and I'm excited to talk about a funky Raptors team that I think is, we'll get into it, but I think they look a little different than people expected coming into the year, but maybe they're, still about as good, as people thought, but in a different way, which is what makes all of this fun to discuss.
A funk fest, as mutual friend of ours, Hank Ward, referred to them. I do enjoy the term funk fest. And so let's kick it off then. Cliff Notes, the Raptors. What have you thought so far? Has anything surprised you? Has anything been exactly as you thought? Your shorthand account of the season so far.
Yeah, when you reached out with kind of these questions, I actually liked this a lot because I think that's something that I've tried to do better when I think about every team. Like, how could I give a synopsis of the team in 1 or 2 sentences if someone asks? So for me with the Raptors, I think, they're a little better than expected offensively. I think Clean the Glass has them just above league average. I think 13th in offensive rating there, and worse defensively than I think people thought. And I think that's partly because of their aggressive style, which leaves them prone to getting beat inside. They don't have, a big time center to cover that. So that would be kind of my cliff notes, but I think they're better offensively because of growth from guys like Fred VanVleet, OG Anunoby, Gary Trent Jr., and obviously, Scottie Barnes being delightful as a rookie. So I guess that's a little more than 1 to 2 sentences, but that would be my way of describing them. A little better offensively because of internal growth, a little worse defensively because of limited personnel.
Okay, and when we talk about that offense of Fred, Gary, OG, I know you were really bullish on OG coming into this season. So let's start there. OG Anunoby obviously has gone through a little bit more of the health and safety stuff, and the hip pointer thing kept him out as well. The pull-up jumper hasn't translated exactly as people would want, but there are some things to like there. What have you thought about him so far?
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy that he feels like this maybe the second year in a row that people kind of pegged him for a breakout. And he's scoring more than last year, and he's still been a very good defender in a lot of ways. But I think he has some kind of, I don't know, inherent, but maybe like flaws in just maybe his physical profile that kind of prevent him from being, people see kind of this 6'8" wing who can score in a litany of ways, but maybe he has some issues that prevent him from being the go-to creator. But obviously the step back, I think, is what stood out to me this year the most. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but that feels like a shot that he's been pretty comfortable with, especially from anywhere 12 to 18 feet. He gets maybe a smaller guy or a guy has some sort of strength advantage, which is, most players because he's exceptionally strong, kind of back down or chisel his way in and get that little 1 or 2 foot step back. But he still has balance issues. The handle is better than, I think it's taken strides basically every year to an extent, but he still has some issues there in terms of a clean gather on pull-ups at times or driving and finishing. So I think he's definitely a better self-creator than last year, when I think he was better than he was the year before in that regard as well. But kind of the balance and the handling give him kind of cap how good he can be in those regards. But I still think he's someone that when the Raptors needed a bucket at times, on maybe a slight advantage or the ball swings his way with the defensive rotation, he's pretty capable. But he just has less infrastructure around him than, previous years. Definitely, I would say more than last year off the top of my head, but less than when the Raptors were competing for a 1 or a 2 seed or even winning a title. I know he wasn't part of that playoff round, unfortunately, but still on the team during the regular season and whatnot. So I hope that all makes sense. There's a lot of OG is a very complex player to analyze offensively, and I want to be measured. I think he's done things better, like I said, with the step back, but the handling and the balance can give him some troubles to really be a top tier wing creator, or even a very good wing creator. I think he's a solid one right now.
Well, yeah, that's the thing about OG is that he can always fall back into a very diverse set of skills, one that is more diverse than a lot of players who are 3 and D adjaces. OG is pretty great as a screener, can actually flash into the middle of his own, and will give you a little bit of the creation chops and downhill passing chops. But if he doesn't take that next step, he still has, a multitude of valuable things to fall back on. The Raptors started out 6-3, and then they fell quite a bit below 500. They've now battled back to 18-17. Do you find that this 18-17 is a sustainable above 500? And did you think that the 6-3 was a sustainable above 500?
I think 18-17 is much closer to their level. I mean, if you look at it, if you extrapolate it out, 6-3 would mean they'd win 18 of their first 27 games, and they won 18 of the first 35. Obviously, some injuries and some health and safety protocol situation, unfortunately. But I think this is a team that, if everything was level across the league, which, it's never the case, or at least everything's kind of stable from here on out for them to an extent, that I think would win more games than it loses, which means, we have at least 42 wins in the year. But they have good players. We mentioned OG, Fred VanVleet. I'm sure we'll get into more, but he's excellent. Pascal, is very good. Gary Trent Jr. has been really, really solid for them this year. That could even be understating him. Scottie Barnes is wonderful. Nick Nurse has some issues, I think, offensively, but I still think he doesn't overcomplicate things, and I think he's still a good coach. And so, when you have good starters and you have someone that you can still feel like helps you, doesn't hurt you on the sidelines, that's a good recipe to win, more games than you lose. And I think, by that definition, I think that's good enough to get you into the playoffs, or at least into the playing competition for, in the East, because the East, maybe it's better than that in that range than the West, but this isn't years past where sometimes, at least in the West, thinking about the West, where there's been years where teams that win 48 games or 47 games don't make the playoffs. So I think that's, this recipe is good enough for the Raptors to sustain where they are currently, which I think is 7 or 8 right now, if I recall.
I think it was the 13-14 Suns who won 49 games and missed the playoffs. The Isaiah Thomas, Dragic, Bledsoe Suns. Or yeah, maybe that was the year before Isaiah Thomas came. And then Isaiah Thomas was the guy they wanted to get into the playoffs, and then he didn't want to be there. Or that was Bledsoe who didn't want to be there.
Anyway, Bledsoe was the classic didn't want to be there. But yeah, I think one year maybe the Grizzlies won 48 or 50 and were like the 7 or 8 seed. There have been some ridiculous years in the West, which is certainly not the case this year, as the 15-22 Spurs currently hold the 10 seed out there.
Okay, so stylistically, these Raptors, they look, well, offensively, as you were saying, like it's pretty simplistic. Nick Nurse, it is a read and react system a lot more than a lot of other systems in the NBA. They pare down their pick and roll for a lot more of, weave stuff above the break just to get guys in motion. And that's a reflection of the guys on the roster. But defensively, you mentioned at the top, like they are playing an extremely aggressive style. If I asked you, hey, what's going on with this team stylistically that surprises you, where would you go with that?
Yeah, I think the aggressive style defensively made sense, right? Like, I think they're first in turnover rate in terms of like 14 turnovers when I was checking recently, which makes sense. They have, a bunch of rangy wings who are smart and aware and instinctual on that end. And they have to force a lot of turnovers because they really, they don't really have a lot of size inside. Khem Birch, is, I think, been solid this year, but he's also missed time and he's still a little small. But offensively, I think, is what's been interesting to me, because this team, according to synergy, is second in transition frequency, which I think most people thought, right? Like this team still has troubles creating the half court because, and so if that's the issue, then you're going to force a lot of turnovers. You're going to get out and run, which is what they do. But they are so slow in the half court. They're 26th in pace, but second transition frequency. I know pace plays into, how fast the opposing team is getting into its possessions as well, but you'd think you're at least, around league average at worst, right? If you're second in transition frequency. But this team is so methodical, led by Fred VanVleet, led by Pascal's patient and poised face-ups from the wings and the elbows, from OG's, methodical, calculated post-ups against switches, things like that. They're just very precise. And you mentioned read and react, but it doesn't feel like they're like, when they get into a half court position, they're not just forcing to get a shot up quick because they know that they're going to struggle, right? I think And so I think they really take on the identity of Fred in that half court. He's just so particular about everything, and he makes so many great decisions. And I think it's just interesting that you have a team that runs so often, in part because it has to, but also because it forces a lot of turnovers. But when they don't get those opportunities, they are very slow about going about their actions.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting. I know you'll enjoy this. Is something that's fantastic is when you find a really great wrinkle about a team, and then you'll actually get quotes from the team accepting that. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
Joe Wolfond wrote just a phenomenal piece about these Raptors and about chasing the possession wins, and how the Raptors at the start of the season would basically have like 4 guys below the free throw line to hunt offensive rebounds. And as you said, everybody knew they were going to chase transition opportunities and stuff like that. But they're looking for the possession differential. And Nick Nurse said, if you get more than, like, if you win the possession differential by more than 5, you win a really, really high percentage of games. And I thought that it was really interesting that the Raptors were trying to artificially manufacture that, because good teams get there naturally by playing with good players and all that kind of stuff. But the Raptors are trying to jerry-rig possession differential. And obviously we've seen mixed returns so far. Isn't that kind of like fascinating?
Yeah, that is. And I want to say, like, Joe does really awesome work, not just on the Raptors, but in general. I really, really like his stuff. Definitely recommend anyone who's listening to give Joe a follow if you don't already. Will certainly make you a smarter basketball consumer, which I think is what everyone wants, right? But yeah, that is interesting. And I think, when I was, I had an idea of who the Raptors were, but I always like to, make sure that what I'm saying, is reinforced by the stats. If I'm going to cite something that, can be proven or disproven by the stats. And I think they're first in like offensive rebounding rate. And they're like 27th in defensive rebounding rate, which is interesting because not those numbers aren't always correlated, but I think it shows, like you mentioning, that there's a concerted effort to, broaden your possessions. And obviously you would love to secure defensive rebounds, but they don't really have the personnel as much because they don't have some, traditional center who can just, swallow a bunch of defensive rebounds. And so, but what they can do is make it work offensively. So that is fascinating. I think, as as I mentioned, you can see that illuminated through the discrepancy of offensive rebounding success and defensive rebounding success there. So yeah, I think that that makes sense. That you quite often when you look at a team, and especially when it's two teams playing that you don't maybe think are in the same caliber. If you're watching it, you go look at the box score. If the team that you don't think is supposed to wins or is competitive, it's usually because they, have more possessions or they make better use of their possessions, which sounds really simplistic, but is really the case. There are certain things about basketball games that are really simple. Now the complex thing is figuring out why those things occur. But yeah, you get more possessions or you maximize your possessions better. You're usually going to be in a game or win a game comfortably or just win in general.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you had been alluding to Fred a couple times in this podcast, and Fred deserves a lot of love. So we're going to go there now. We're going to talk about the all-star case of Fred VanVleet, and then we'll sneak in some Pascal Siakam love just because of the form he's been in. I don't expect him to make it. He missed too many games, and he took too long to get back into the swing of things, I would say. But yeah, let's do Fred. Thoughts on Fred VanVleet?
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of just rough-handedly doing my all-star teams for fun a few nights ago. When we get closer, I'll be a little more meticulous, look at the stats, get all the spreadsheets out, and obviously I've watched the film. But Fred is like pretty clearly on there for me right now. I would be disappointed and frustrated if he doesn't make it. Like legitimately, other players would be deserved. Like I think if whoever makes it instead of him will be someone that I won't really be upset with. But he's just been so incredible. He's been an awesome shooter, obviously. But you've seen strides as a 2-point scorer, way more effective and comfortable from mid-range, especially that area from maybe right out, like maybe 3 feet outside the restricted area to 2 feet inside the arc or 1 foot inside the arc. And I think, what impresses me is obviously, the defense, right? Like he's great navigating the screen. He's great at the nail with those strong digs, those stunts in the post. He was good on the ball, like I said there. But he just has a certain level of control on both ends over so many possessions. And I think that's what stars or superstars do. Everyone has a different definition of superstar. I'm a little more liberal with it. Like I would consider Fred VanVleet a superstar this year. I would need to see him a little more sustained play to just say he's outright a superstar. But this year, I think he's absolutely played that way because he controls so many possessions. And going back to what I'm talking about with, the half court offense, like he is just there's a mastery from him that is really impressive. And so I just find myself like watching the Raptors play and just constantly being like he's an incredible basketball player. Like, yeah, there are certain things he does well that give him that label, but sometimes it is easy to just be like, he's really, really freaking good at NBA basketball, and that's really hard to do. And as I said, it just stems from just the fact that I feel like he is always in control of the things he wants to do. It doesn't always work out in his favor, but he's in control, and that's what superstars and stars do. And that's why I'd comfortably have him on the East All-Star team right now.
I have a stat for you that I know you'll just adore. So this is not one of the public-facing statistics of Second Spectrum, but I believe it's in the middle of December. Fred VanVleet was the most disruptive tag man in the NBA. Does that surprise you?
It does. I think just because he's 5'10", 5'11", 6 foot, whatever.
Shorter than me, which is kind of like
whatever Fred prefers. I am
yeah.
Cool. Whatever height you want. Some people like going taller. Some people like going shorter. But it surprised me a little bit just because of that. Because it's really hard to be disruptive as a lone man. Like if you're not at like 6'6", maybe even then, like it can be tough. But as I mentioned, he's much smaller than that. But he's so aware. He's so heady. He's really tough to dislodge. Like a lot of times guards who are acting as low men struggle because it's easy to kind of finish through them or dislodge them. Fred is not that way. You see it, like I mentioned, at the point of attack, playing the nail. So it surprised me a little bit when I think about it. I can see why that was the case, at least, as of 3 weeks ago or 2 weeks ago, whenever that stat was determined. But that's an awesome stat. I just am so impressed with him. And I don't know if right now I'd have him as, the second guard starter alongside Trey. I think Trey for me is kind of indisputable there, but he's at least in the running. Like I think you could go with any of DeMar, Levine, Harden, VanVleet. If you really want to stretch it to even a Garland or LaMelo, I probably would push back, but I wouldn't be, irate about it. But I think that just speaks to how good, Fred's been, because the guard depth in the East is really, really awesome this year. And I think Fred has as good a case as anyone for second, which just speaks to him. And he's been such a joy to watch this year. I just really, really enjoy him. And it's, he's just incredible. I really hope he makes the All-Star team, because he's one of those guys that there's no doubt in my mind right now he's an All-Star. And I know, it's not infallible for everyone, but for me it is. And I feel like there's enough evidence out there to reinforce that sentiment.
And as an homage to, I think you should leave, he can hit. He is one of the NBA players who's allowed to be uber aggressive. So that helps with tagging and being more disruptive. Let's do Pascal. I don't think very few people will put him on actually, I'm sure that no coaches will put him on an all-star ballot. It's just, you miss that much time, you miss whatever. But he's been in that form. He's been just terrific recently. I'd like to get your take on Pascal.
Yeah, it's interesting. What stood out to me in the games I've watched, and I want to say, I don't know, Pascal's played 22 games. I've probably watched, I don't know, any, just off the top of my head, I have a track of all the Raptors games I've watched, but I don't have a delineation for when Pascal came back off the top, but probably 9, 10, 11 of his games maybe. What stands out to me, especially compared to last year and even dating back to the bubble, is the quality of shots he gets feel a lot better to me than last year, and when he struggled in the bubble. And he just feels a little more paced. But when he decides to go, he just feels spry and light and quick off the ground. He's had a number of plays this year where that handle's on a string and he's hesitating, then exploding the rim for a finish or getting into that quick pull up from 14 feet away. That's obviously been the case as of late. He's put together a lot of really awesome, offensive games. For my viewing, the passing obviously took a leap last year, and I think he's been pretty good there again. Defensively, the best way I can describe it, I feel, is inconsistent. There are times where I feel like he looks like the Pascal that I first saw 4 or 5 years ago, where he's really quick and active on the perimeter, guarding a bunch of different positions. And other times he looks a little slower. I think about, I was looking at my notes before this pod, and one game where I think he looked great on the perimeter defensively is the one against the Celtics in late November. But then when they play the Clippers, I think on New Year's, he looked a little slower to me. Not slower in general, like he was still good offensively. He was really awesome offensively, him and Fred, especially close in that game. But he just feels inconsistent to me. Like he'll be late to execute a switch or a tag or a stunt, and then the next play of the next game, he's right on top of it. So, I think some of that is just because he's coming back from injury, but also because the Raptors have had so many different guys in and out of the lineup that makes it tough as well. So I've been really impressed offensively, and at times really impressed defensively, but just a little inconsistent in the latter area for me. But I've just liked the quality of shots and how quick he looks and operates offensively. And that's been really important for him.
Mm-hmm. Totally agreed. The most interesting thing for me is his rebounding rate is way up, and his contested rebounding rate is way up. And he shoots more mid-range jump shots to keep the offense afloat instead of he doesn't pull up from three anymore. And with the Raptors, he's the release valve now, where the Serge Ibaka pick and pop was for 4 years. And you could even see it in the game last night against Milwaukee, that when they didn't have anything going, and the one pass away 3-pointer that is the start of a lot of droughts, including the 27 3-point drought that the Houston Rockets went after. It's something that he's helping them avoid. And while it's not as sexy as the 34% that he shot in the second team All NBA season on 3-point pull-ups, which 34% for him is pretty crazy, especially on, I think, 3 attempts a game. But it's been cool to see him kind of switch up how he attacks. And I 100% agree with you that the pacing and the control that he's played with inside the arc has just been leagues better than it has been in the past. Okay, Scottie Barnes, the golden boy of Raptors Twitter, the golden boy of the fan base. He is endlessly endearing, and his favorite food, baked beans. What do you think about Scottie Beans?
Yeah, I've been really, really impressed with him. Obviously he's one of the best rookies in a really incredible class. I feel like every night I could wake up. I feel like every night I could watch a great game from a rookie, or the next day wake up and find one to watch. But I think what's been cool is watching just how Scottie evolves and adapts to different circumstances in his game. I think back to maybe a month ago when he started taking way more threes, and it was because the coaching staff encouraged him to, and he did, and he started making them. There's times where it feels like he's been a little better as a passer at times. He's certainly turning the corner defensively, figuring out kind of the speed of the NBA game and all the rotations that a hectic Raptors defense requires of a guy like Scottie who can cover so much ground and do so many things. But I think what's so cool when I've watched as of late, especially, and this is the case all season, but it's just kind of what stood out to me when I've watched a couple of his games recently, is the way he kind of covers grounds and creates the space he needs for a shot, especially from kind of right inside the foul line, is really impressive. I was watching the Spurs game the other day, and he just had a couple of plays where he kind of backs down, and the Spurs would dig in the post, and he would just promptly kind of raise the ball above his head, take a big long stride into space where he kind of goes from perpendicular to the hoop to parallel to the hoop and just quickly rise for a little jumper. So, obviously there seemed to be a lot of questions when Scottie was a prospect, or it's a pre-draft prospect, I should say, and kind of how he would score the ball. And now I feel like almost the question is what's the best way for Scottie to score the ball, which I think is a really, 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 really impressive development in such a quick amount of time. And so I've just liked how many different versions of Scottie we've seen throughout the year, and how many different ways he can impact the game, whether it's scoring, passing, figuring things out defensively.
I love that you remarked upon his ability to get downhill while being agile. It's a tough thing to do because your center of gravity gets higher when you move, and especially if you're moving fast. And when he's backing guys down and being kind of bouncy about it so that he can, hop step into a place where he can take a jumper or a push shot or something like that, or a big gather, he's still able to get guys, moving downhill with him. And his motion in that kind of stuff has been really advanced, and he's very, very accomplished at getting to his own shots. He's passed out of some empty side stuff recently. That's been kind of I wonder why he's doing that, but it's a really, really fantastic aspect of his game. Do you have any thoughts defensively on Scottie?
Yeah, I would say honestly, that's where I feel like I don't have a great read. And some of that is because, I try to watch as much as I can. And I try to make sure I'm watching every team, every 2, 3, 4, 5 days. And sometimes, Scottie's he's played most of the season, but he's been in and out of the lineup a little bit. I think he had a wrist injury early in the year, and then he was in health and safety. So I just don't feel like I've gotten to tap into Scottie once every 3 days. It feels like it's maybe once every 7 days or 8 days, and that can make it tough for me to get a read on a little more nuanced part of a guy's game like defense. But I do feel like he's had some really impressive plays off the ball. At times, there's definitely times where I feel like, a guy will cut or something, and Scottie doesn't sense it because he's watching the ball, or he just misses a rotation that I don't feel like that was the Scottie Barnes that I watched when I saw, him. I didn't really watch much from Florida State, but I scouted enough of him, when he was playing in high school and with Montverde and, with AAU and whatnot. So I guess this is a long-winded way of me saying I truthfully don't have a great feel for Scottie's defense, just because I, can't watch every game. And sometimes when I catch the Raptors, he's been out of the lineup for, a couple of reasons. But that truthfully, I think for me is the biggest priority as I continue to watch the Raptors over the last, 47 regular season games, is to kind of get a better read on him defensively, because I don't feel like I feel like at times I would have a read, but he's such a rapidly evolving player that I can't nail it down, which is a testament to him. Honestly, the fact that some guys you can watch 4 or 5 games, less so with rookies, but still sometimes it's the case, and feel like good about certain parts of the game. But with Scottie, the defense, I just feel like is always changing, and so I don't have a great read on it, honestly.
Yeah, he's been a tough guy to kind of pencil in as like, okay, we understand. But if you want a really good game to watch for, the Raptors started using him as the low man more often in rotation. December 10th against the Knicks was probably his best defensive game of the year, and he played closer to the big position, or closer aesthetically to what we would understand as like a big man than you would as a wing. But yeah, very happy with those answers on Scottie. That's about where I am as far as Scottie goes. But okay, final question for you. If you think the Raptors are a team that could add players for a run at the playoffs / a puncher's chance in a first round series, we talked about, are they the 7-8? Are they the 9-10? Whatever. Like a first round series is crazy to win coming in at that seeding. Is there something you'd like them to look for? Or adversely, if you were another team, what would you be trying to pry away from the Raptors for a run of your own?
Yeah, I mean, I think, pretty obviously they could benefit from a big man. Just make it easier to end possessions. Don't put all the pressure on your wings or your big forwards, or if you want to call them there. I don't know exactly where that would come from. Like I think a guy like Taj Gibson would be interesting for a couple of teams. Like that's a guy that I think the Bucks would benefit from as well. They obviously just cut DeMarcus Cousins, so they're maybe looking for another big man with the Brook Lopez thing in flux. But I think Taj has been pretty good this year. I know he's not huge. Like he's not a 7 foot center, not 6'11". I think he's maybe 6'9", but he's a pretty awesome player. And I don't know what the Knicks direction is. They're only a game and a half behind the Raptors, but they had pretty big expectations this year. And, for a litany of reasons, they haven't, accomplished those through 38 games. So he's a guy that I think would be interesting. I'm curious, I cover the Sixers. I'm curious what they do with Andre Drummond. He's been great for them this year, but he's also a impending free agent who should get a bigger deal than the veterans minimum, because he's played, much better than that this year. So I'd be, is there anything to do with the Raptors, anything that might entice them there, right? Like, I don't know if the Sixers, this is not intel based or anything. I don't know if the Sixers are going to trade him, but I just wonder, is that a guy, like, do they try and start playing Charles Bassey, the backup 5 who's been good for the Sixers this year in small samples. So I think a big man could help, but I also think a backup guard, I know that they are often going to, letting one of their forwards, run the offense when Fred sits. And I know that they would probably like to have Goran Dragic there if, I know, but they're, kind of, that whole situation is unto its own. But those are the two situations or the two spots I think that could benefit them, especially a big man. Just make it a little easier defensively. Let guys like OG and Pascal and Fred at times fill the lanes rather than always having to hunt for rebounds. Because I think those guys can be so dynamic in transition, whether it's Pascal getting downhill, Fred leaking out to the wings for those quick trigger threes, OG doing his thing. But a lot of times them and others, are kind of tasked to rebound the ball, and that can make it tougher to get ahead of the transition defense. So those are the things to me that I think, could really benefit this team and make them go from, 18-17 to a team that, maybe you feel a little more confident about declaring outright playoff, or your playoff team versus maybe even just a play-in contender. But on the second half of that question, someone who comes to mind for me that I think, I think, most people will be like, oh, like, what about Pascal? But I don't know there. But I think a guy like Yuta, I'd be interested to see kind of, like, he's a guy that's been really impressive to me in the games that I've seen when he's been in the rotation. But you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like he might be someone who's squeezed from the rotation when the Raptors are all healthy. And I just been impressed with his defensive versatility. He can attack close a little bit. He moves really well for his size defensively. I remember the game against the Nets a few weeks ago. He had some impressive possessions against KD, and that's tough to do. Like, most defenders can't bother KD because he's 7 foot and shoots the ball above his head. And Yuta had a couple of possessions where at least it felt like, okay, I don't know how much he impacted the result there, but it felt like he at least did something against KD. So he's a guy, I think, he has good size. He moves well at his size. He can attack closeouts. He shooting 38% from 3 this year, I believe. So I just think he's someone that could really benefit a rotation with his, ability to, play both ends in a complementary role and maybe even sometimes defend a bigger wing. Like, he is a guy that I wonder, we both converse with a lot of Bulls fans. And the Bulls have been really fun to watch this year. I know a lot of them are thinking, like, how can we get someone who can at least bother some of the big wing creators? Because I think that's probably the Bulls' biggest deficiency defensively is that, and maybe Vucevic defending or playing against athletic centers, controlling the glass. But Yuta's a guy I think that the Bulls could go and target. I know they want to get Harrison Barnes, Jeremy Grant. Those have been 2 names tossed around, even Kenrich Williams to an extent. But the Raptors feel like they have someone who isn't as good as those guys, but could fill the role to an extent of what the Bulls need there. So he's, I just think like those big wings who can stretch the floor moderately well are usually pretty important for championship contenders. I never like to say one archetype is like necessary, but if you look at some of the best teams the last few years, they generally have them. Whether it's it's the I don't know what you want to call Giannis, but you can call Giannis, I guess, a big wing. Jay Crowder, Draymond. The Lakers had some size with LeBron and even Kyle Kuzma to an extent when they won the bubble. The Heat obviously had Jay Crowder as well. So it just feels like a really useful archetype on good teams. And I don't know if the Raptors have enough. I don't know if there are enough minutes for the Raptors to maximize his services. And he's a guy I think could really help some playoff teams.
That's a really great assessment. This is something I've actually talked about before. When the Raptors were doing much worse during the year, I was like, Yuta is really good, and he is the best closeout defensively in the league. I think his footwork is great, man. He's one of the rare guys who can keep 3-point attempts down without surrendering drives. Just like the routes he takes, his footwork, and he's really quick, like with his feet in those positions. It's awesome. And you're correct. Like when the Raptors are fully healthy, when they have Barnes, when they have Anunoby, when they have Siakam, and they're still trying to figure out, are they playing all 3 of Boucher, Birch, and Precious? How many of, like, who's the guy who's losing out? And Birch and Boucher are probably going to get minutes regardless, especially since Boucher's been good lately. And Precious is really young, and he was the big piece in the Kyle Lowry trade. So they're invested in him. And Yuta is a guy who has probably, like, he's developed into a guy who's too good for the rotation like spot that he occupies with the Raptors. And certainly a team that wants to make waves in the playoffs and is a little bit short on wing talent, he'd be, a terrific fit. I love that answer. Although I really like Yuta, so not being able to write or watch every game that he participates in would be a bit tough. But, I understand good things for Yuta, and then hopefully he could get paid the next year. But any parting shots for the Raptors and the fans?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think, I mean, obviously they've won 4 in a row now, I think, or at least 3. It feels like this team is starting to figure it out. And, like the East, it feels pretty wide open as well. I'm not talking about I'm not saying the Raptors are going to win the title, but it feels like there's a lot of upward mobility available in this Eastern Conference climate. And I think the Raptors just, I would have to think about more in depth, but Fred at least has a case for an all-NBA guy. Pascal, as of late, especially, has been playing like an all-star. We know he can play like one. OG, it seems like as he kind of gets, his footing again, is a guy that, was at least an above-average starter, which I generally deem top 50, top 60. That's a really good recipe. That's like, you have those guys leading the way, you're in a good position. So I'm just really excited to watch this team continue to unfold. I'm excited to watch Scottie, like I said, figuring out his defense and kind of where I assess it currently, where I assess its growth is one of my kind of to do things on my to-do list, I should say, Jesus, as the season progresses. But I really do find this team interesting, and I think they are good because they have good players, and their best player in Fred VanVleet is really, really, really good, as we've made clear. But just a fascinating team, and one that I think there are certain teams I watch that I don't find them super complex in how I analyze what they have, what they're good at, what they're missing. The Raptors not that way, and that's enjoyable. They really force me to kind of be focused and reflect upon everything I'm watching, and that's good. And that's because they're fun and they're cool and they're interesting. I really enjoy that.
Well, Jackson, I thank you so much for your insights. They were very pleasing to me. If I'm going to be a snob and judge everybody who comes through here and what I'm doing, like Mark and Nikias, when they come through to talk about them, and I judge, what do you know about the Raptors? I won't, but if I were that person, I'd say you did really well, because obviously my eye test is the greatest one of all.
Hey, no, that's fine. If roles were reversed and you were coming on a Sixers podcast, I wouldn't judge you, but I would feel I would feel as though I have a good baseline to assess the inside of their takes. But I'm glad that they passed your eye test, because it's hard trying to cover the whole league. There are things I'm missing. Yeah, I'm sure there are 15 developments you could rattle off about the Raptors this year that I would probably look befuddled. But I'm glad that I provided some insight on a team that is challenging to analyze, but that is good. That makes me a smarter basketball consumer. Hopefully makes me a smarter basketball consumer. And that's always a good thing.
Is there anything you'd like the people to read, listen to of yours, or is there anywhere you'd like to direct them?
Nothing really right now. I have a few different pieces in the works that will come out in the next few days, but I will keep those under wraps for now and keep them, make them a surprise. I feel like I tweet about and talk about enough basketball that I can always kind of keep people off guard, but if you look closely enough, you'll figure things out. But I will kind of let the people, I'll keep it a guessing game. But I'll have some fun stuff coming out here. I was sick for a little bit and took me away from writing, but I am back, and I'm excited to write about some stuff again, because the NBA is wonderful, and it's fun to write about things and give your take on what's happening. I guess, my goodness, that's why I write. That's why I don't podcast so much. Start to ramble eventually.
Listener, if I can suggest you do one thing, let's go to Twitter. If you have Twitter, at JackFrank_GIF, that's GIF. And here's the thing. You'll be exposed to all of Jackson's great work, but also the extremely niche vernacular that accompanies the clips he puts out of, let's say, Devin Vassell's tantalizing pull-up shooting, or some groovy playmaking from DeMar DeRozan. Sound good, Jackson?
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks for coming on, man. It's been a blast.
Yeah, my pleasure. Always enjoy talking basketball with my friend.
Okay. Listener, thanks for tuning in as well, whether you got into this in the morning or at night. Have a blessed day, and goodbye.